Welcome to Sweet Valley Diaries, the podcast where we only have one rule. No matter what the circumstances, no matter why you left, you have to call your dad to tell him whose house you ran away to. Book number 25, Nowhere to Run.
Will Emily lose everything she loves?
Hi. No, that was great. Welcome to Sweet Valley Diaries. I am your host, Marissa Flaxbart, and with me today is a very special guest, Mr. Dan Gaspari. Hello.
Hello there.
Thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So, Dan, this show has a rich history of having a sort of incestuous series of guests in the best possible way. And I think that you continue in that rich tradition. Mm-hmm. I think that how exactly is a question that could probably be answered by the first question we always ask in the podcast, which is, are you familiar at all with Sweet Valley High? Were you before you read this book?
I think I was aware of the books and probably sort of that in Babysitter's Club, but not something I ever read. But since you are best friends with my wife, I sort of got roped into this a little bit, and now I feel like I'm part of it, and I'm keeping up, and now I'm here today to talk about one of the books.
Oh, yes. So your wife, Mary Parker, who famously was on the show shortly before you became engaged.
Correct.
And then made a return appearance on the show to, I believe, proclaim that, or at some point she was going to, like, Bruce Patman a guy. Like, she was going to find a Bruce Patman, and she was going to, ruin his life by tricking him into marriage, something like that.
Oh.
But we determined that was not what was happening with you and Mary, so don't worry.
Got it.
I mean, we can get to this at the end, but, like, I don't really think of you as a Bruce Patman type.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Although he seems to be changed as of this book.
A little bit reformed. It's weird. Every time Bruce Patman, listeners will notice that Bruce Patman, just to have a little diversion right off the top, listeners will probably notice that Bruce Patman has not really figured very much into these recent books. So far in season 3, kind of been a non-entity. But, he's about to return.
Mm-hmm. Big time.
Yeah.
But that's for next episode.
That's for the next episode. Well, how about we talk about the cover of Nowhere to Run? Let's describe this for our listeners.
So we have one of the Wakefield twins, I presume it's Elizabeth.
Definitely,
comforting a sad-looking girl, I presume to be Emily, and she's wearing a fuchsia polo? Yeah.
So Emily Meyer is someone that even listeners who read the books when they were growing up might not exactly remember. This is one of those minor characters in the Spotlight books where suddenly we focus in. That happens more and more as the series goes on, understandably. But we haven't had too many of those yet. Emily Meyer is the drummer for something listeners will surely recognize, a band called
the Droids, the best band in Sweet Valley, California.
And the best band at Sweet Valley High. I think they're described that way sometimes, but more widely, the best, like, teen band, the best rock band in town. And Emily is their, like, cool drummer. Something about Emily Meyer. Are we going to say Meyer or Mayer? What do you think?
I think Meyer.
I like Meyer. It's Mayer. Yeah. That's how I've always thought of her, as Emily Meyer. I actually think that for once, the artist here, the wonderful artist, who I love very much, James Matthews, has depicted a young woman that actually looks like a teenager.
Yes.
She looks kind of immature. She does not look like a rock band drummer in any way.
No.
She has the polo that she's wearing does not really fit her. She does not appear to have, let's just say, breasts to speak of. Which it doesn't really come up in the book, I'm glad to say. But, the person that is comforting her is Elizabeth Wakefield. And we can be sure of that because another thing that this book represents is yet another chapter in the Elizabeth helps out someone that she doesn't know anything about.
No.
Tradition.
Correct.
In fact, I would say that this book makes it pretty clear that Elizabeth doesn't know anything about Emily Meyer.
Nothing at all, but she is more than happy to get involved. And she's once Emily realizes this, she just sort of grabs hold of the Wakefield family support line here.
Exactly, like pretty literally. It's like, who can I talk to? Well, okay, well, let's get into it, the story naturally here. Because so we talked about your history with Sweet Valley. We talked about the cover. So now we'll talk about the book.
Sounds good.
So the book starts with Emily Meyer nowhere in sight, right? Because the first thing that's happening...
Well, we have our B plot, if you will, which is that the Wakefield grandparents are in town.
Yeah! This is kind of a big deal. This is the first time we've ever heard of, I think, of these grandparents.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if they had appeared or even been mentioned.
They have definitely not appeared yet. I am not sure if we've heard them so much as mentioned. I think that they probably came up in passing. But this is Ned Wakefield's parents. Ned Wakefield's parents who, boy, Jessica is really excited to see.
And the entire book, I was just waiting for there to be some sort of scheme behind all this enthusiasm, but yeah. I'm sadly misjudged. She just really loves her grandparents and hanging out with them.
I would say it's very uncharacteristic. Now, the book tries to say that Jessica's excitement about something is characteristic of Jessica. Elizabeth says, like, oh, she's on Jessica Standard Time. All she cares about is the next big thing that's happening, and she just can't bide her time waiting for it. The next big thing that's happening is described on the first page of the book as the biggest family event in ages, a 3-week visit from their grandparents.
Indeed.
Which, damn, that is a long visit.
Yes, and you can tell that Alice is really enjoying this visit.
Yeah, so that is, I mean, we can go ahead and talk about it, the B plot here, because, I don't know, I think maybe the book starts with this because otherwise it would be like, who the hell is Emily Meyer?
Right.
Mayer? I can't remember what I decided. Meyer. Who the hell is Emily Meyer? Young readers might be thinking if they open the book and start, oh, yeah, the Droids, okay, yeah, all right. But instead, we enter with the Wakefields. Grandma and Grandpa are coming, and Jessica is beside herself. But yeah, this weird thing unfolds with Alice.
Right. Well, I'm not sure if they just needed to introduce some sort of conflict, because it seems... very localized to the fact that her in-laws are in town for 3 straight weeks.
Yeah, I kind of wish that the book had just gone out and made it so that Alice and Grandma Wakefield had bad blood or something.
Ooh.
There was some sort of beef, but they really don't. The book bends over backwards to make it seem as if they all get along really well, and actually Alice really loves the Wakefields, but it's just that. It's so dumb. It actually made me mad. I don't know how you felt.
Well, it feels forced, and that they do seem to sort of monopolize the kids' times. So and again, every single time they talk about it, they're like, this is perfectly reasonable because they're visiting for a short time and the kids haven't seen them in a while. Right.
So listeners, if you will imagine, a highly anticipated grandparent visit, they're going to be there for 3 weeks. And at the pretty much at the beginning, there's this interesting sort of subtextual moment. Let me find it here. It's in chapter 2. Grandpa Wakefield, this is their first meal at the Wakefield house, and Alice has cooked it. And Grandpa Wakefield says, I don't know how you do it, Alice, Grandpa Wakefield said appreciatively, his dark eyes twinkling as he surveyed the food spread out on the dining room table. How you manage to work full-time and still prepare a dinner like this is beyond me. The world has changed, Bob, Grandma Wakefield teased him as the family sat down at the table. I could go on and read from there, but I just thought Grandma and Grandpa Wakefield have this, kind of weirdly conservative... Mm-hmm. Weirdly is not the word. It's just that it's subtly conservative streak. Did you notice that? Did you pick up on that?
A little bit, yeah. Very...
This line doesn't really represent that. This line makes it seem like Grandma Wakefield is saying, come on, Grandpa Wakefield, things have changed. But Grandpa Wakefield is complimenting Alice. Anyway, this all seems to get into Alice's head. She's thinking, oh my God, am I a bad mother because I work so much? right?
Right.
That's like her
I think
beef.
that's essentially the initial lead into this sort of her having all these second thoughts, wondering about her being a bad mom because she's too career focused and stuff like that.
And I will grant the book that is a real thing that I'm sure like most working mothers probably go through. There's just this element of like, keeps on like scheming to take extra time off of work. She takes an entire day off work at one point as like a last ditch effort. The first thing she does is she gets off work early. She goes to the grocery store and buys 6 of the finest steaks she could find. And she just comes home and announces that she's going to cook them the steak dinner.
Without giving them any warning.
No, and that would be fine, except she knows the grandparents are in town. Ned keeps saying they're in town for 3 weeks. We never see them. They live far away. We haven't even told the listeners yet. They live in...
Michigan.
Michigan.
Which is weird that they live in... Yeah, the Wakefields live in California, but the grandparents live in Michigan.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so they only see them like once a year, and the twins are like, oh, I kind of wish Grandma and Grandpa were here all the time, but secretly I know that it's more precious to only see them once a year.
Of course.
And they're going to take them to the Hampshire Place Mall. Did you know that?
The new mall, which is, it's, I don't know if they've been to that.
I don't think we've ever even
different
heard
from
of
the
that.
other mall with Lizette's and the other stores, presumably.
Right. Oh, you're just like warming my heart now.
I've been doing some research. I do want to point they have Grandma Wakefield as in a PhD program for history, which seems a little odd that she's going for a PhD. I don't know.
Yeah, like she could be going back to school to get, I don't know. Leah, what exactly is she going to do?
She's going to be the oldest, here it is right here.
Yeah.
Yes, she's going to be the oldest student in the PhD program in American history at University of Michigan. Which is, I mean, it's cool, but it's like, is she really going for a doctorate?
Yeah, she's going to be professor, Grandma the professor.
Because she loves history that much.
Yeah, she really loves history. And at one point, Grandma Wakefield says, we'll get back around to this when it comes up, but at one point, Grandma Wakefield said, you know what? We'll say it when it comes up. How about that?
Sounds good.
Hampshire Place, though, that's something where I thought that was where the other shoe was going to drop. That all Jessica really cares about is that Grandma promised to buy them each an entire outfit.
Yes, I thought it was going to tie in with that. I was just waiting for Jessica to like suggest some sort of over the top gift for her,
right?
And introduce some conflict there, but it never came about.
Yeah, it never really does. Instead, so Alice, like as I was saying, I'll grant the book that Alice's upset is like understandable, like the kind of thing that, like the kind of inner conflict that any working mother would have, but the timing of it is just like makes me roll my eyes because of course the girls are spending a lot of time with the grandparents. The grandparents are only in town for 3 weeks, so this time when she comes home and she's going to cook the steak dinner, though, it brings up an important detail.
Chinese food,
yeah,
which of course makes
Ned.
Papa Wakefield. Ned is cannot eat Chinese food, so the twins are very excited because they can go to somewhere nice with the grandparents.
They haven't been out for Chinese food in 6 months.
Oh my god!
It made me think, like, in the 80s, was Chinese food like a really big deal? I think maybe more so than now. I don't know.
Possibly. Certainly the level of popularity in terms of takeout, its ubiquity, probably hit its apex in the 80s. Now we have like Thai food and other things that are super, sushi, across all over the U.S. So Chinese food probably had its heyday in the 80s. Well,
Jessica and Elizabeth are really excited that Grandma and Grandpa are taking them out to this new Chinese food restaurant. But the book backpedals a little bit because, we on Sweet Valley Diaries have given the book a lot of shit for making Ned Wakefield allergic to Chinese food.
No longer allergic, just sickened by it.
In fact, at one point, we have Jessica when Jessica is explaining to her mother that, like, no, the whole family can't go out to dinner, and no, we can't change the restaurant we're going to. Jessica says, Mom, Dad doesn't like Chinese food, remember? He says it makes him sick. So he says it makes him sick, seems like actually a little bit more realistic than...
He's just not into it, which is fine.
Yeah. Okay. So...
But yeah, perhaps we should get on to
the listeners are like, what about Emily Meyer?
She's the drummer for the Droids.
She's drummer.
And essentially, we'll say it's a real Cinderella story. And we're talking about the ending, the beginning, with the evil stepmother.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I completely agree. This book brought back, like, the character of the wicked stepmother in a way that we haven't seen since fairy tales.
Indeed.
She's so bad.
So her father has remarried a woman named Karen, and she essentially seems to be difficult for Emily to be around. She comes from, I think, a well-to-do family.
Yeah, she's an only child of wealthy parents.
Right. And now she has had a child, a baby named... let me just double check the spelling and pronunciation on this.
I can tell you right now. The baby's name is Carrie with a K. So this speaks volumes. I mean, partly it makes me feel like the writer of this book was really lazy, but I think actually there's a not very subtle symmetry here, right? It says a lot about both Karen, the stepmother, and Emily Meyer's father, who has married Karen, that both of them together have agreed that it's okay for their baby daughter's name to be Carrie, Karrie, which short for Karen, right?
Right. Yes. It is definitely just an alliterative pet name. Yeah, not that different from Karen.
It's going to be confusing around the house when Carrie is a little bit older and people start shouting for her, and nobody knows whether they're talking about Karen or Carrie.
Carrie. And Emily.
And Ronald, I think is her dad's name.
Or Mr. Meyer, as the book seems to primarily use, which makes me always wonder, what's his name again?
Yeah, I don't know what. Ronald, I just thought of Ronald McDonald. So because it's not Ron, it's Ronald.
Yeah.
Sorry, any Ronalds out there. That's what your name makes me think of. I'm sure you're used to it. Yeah, so Emily at the very beginning of the book is just kind of complaining to Dana, who is the lead singer for the Droids, about how terrible it is. And Dana's like, oh, having a baby at home would be so cute. And Emily just keeps pushing back at how it's totally upended her life and she has to completely reorganize her life around Carrie and when Carrie's asleep and when Carrie's awake and Carrie.
So the main issue is that Emily wants to practice the drums, but baby Carrie needs to be sleeping, and which means there's only a very limited window of time for her to practice. Right. But then whenever she does practice, Karen runs downstairs and yells at her because the baby is asleep again for some reason. So,
and even before we get a glimpse into that, so we learn a few things about Emily. We learn that, first of all, just about her immediate problem. She actually loves Carrie. She's like, who couldn't love Carrie? She's 8 months old now. She's so cute. And she has some really sweet moments, actually, with this baby where she just looks down at her baby sister and she just, like, oh, she's so beautiful and, oh, I never want anything to happen to you. Like, the book establishes, even despite Emily's initial protestations about the baby, she loves the baby. It's just that what the baby represents in her life is this, like, new world order. And Karen, Emily is sure, hates her. And from all we can see, it seems like that might be true. But at the very least, Emily is afraid that Karen is going to send her off to boarding school.
Right. That is the primary threat is I don't think ever actually brought up, but is always implied is that she can't go against Karen too far because she'll be sent away. Yeah, and Karen I will say, it's not just a figment of Emily's imagination, although it doesn't really ever come up. She doesn't outright say it, but it definitely seems to be implied. There's some brochures she has ordered. Right. So I feel like some of these conversations are off stage for this book. So presumably she's actually made the threat at some point. And so Emily is terrified of being sent away from her friends and everything in Sweet Valley. Yeah, the evil stepmother is going to send her away from her beloved father and her beloved kingdom. Exactly. Because Emily loves Sweet Valley. Emily also is starting to love a boy. Mm-hmm, that's right. A Dan. Yeah. I don't know if that was an intentional choice by you or just by
I wish
chance.
I could say that it was, but did you relate to Dan Scott as character?
I like Dan, and he seemed like a nice guy.
So we've never heard of Dan Scott, I don't think, before
but
this.
he's the bass player for the Droids. So
Oh, that's what he does.
And I did make an immediate note saying you should be careful, Emily. Interband relationships can go sour. And if you truly are the best band in Sweet Valley, things could get a little complicated.
Dan Scott, let's see what we have to say about Dan Scott. This is Emily thinking about how hard it would be to be forced away from her beloved hometown. Leaving Sweet Valley was simply out of the question, especially since Dan Scott had come into the picture. It wasn't that anything had exactly happened between Emily and Dan. They were just friends. Really good friends. He was the bass guitar player for the Droids, and lately he and Emily had been practicing together a lot and talking about all sorts of things, such as music and the future. They were growing close. So that's Dan and Emily. It's sweet. They're sweet.
It's extremely sweet, and yes, you're definitely rooting for those two.
Yeah, but then Emily has this other really crazy backstory detail.
Right. So she has told everyone that her mother died when she was young, but in fact she has run off and sort of walked out on the family and only kept slightly in touch with Emily and more or less has not been in communication with her for at least a few years, I think.
Yeah. So Emily's mom left the family, as you said, when Emily was a little girl, and Emily's kind of like, what kind of mother would do that? She and her father always had a really close relationship. This is also very fairy tale, right? Like, but my father and I were really close. He's this, I'm his most beloved person. And now here's this other woman entering the picture. And she's jealous of me, the beloved daughter, and wants to assert her authority. And then she brings her own baby into the world. And then it's literally like she's like a witch. I mean, not literally, but it is figuratively like she's a witch.
All of the interactions seem to involve Karen screaming at Emily for one reason or another. It hardly seems like they talk that much.
At one point, she cries.
Oh, yes.
Karen cries.
Yeah.
Emily doesn't cry, but Karen is like brings her own self to tears. Also, Karen at one point really turns on the charm sometimes, and like Emily's like, well, as soon as Karen starts calling me Em, I know that she's trying to get on my good side. Right. And whenever she asks Emily to babysit,
right.
But it's like as soon as Emily has even the slightest pushback, Karen is like, you don't give a shit about what I do for this family. It's hard having a baby and you're just an ungrateful, spoiled brat. She really like goes really deep really fast.
Right. And Ron Meyer doesn't really. He's like, oh yeah, you should. She's having a tough time, so he's definitely not a sympathetic ear for Emily in any way.
Well, this is really what I mean when I say that she has this like magical power, because the power that she seems to have is that she has cast a spell on Emily's dad, so that Emily's dad only believes what Karen's side of the story and is unwilling to hear anything negative Emily has to say, and Emily tries not to talk shit about Karen, but sometimes it's like, Dad, you don't understand what's happening.
Right.
I got really worked up at certain points reading this book. How did you feel?
It's definitely felt, like I said, it was like, oh, she's a wicked stepmother, and yeah, I was like, this is pretty over the top, very melodramatic, but, I guess that's...
It was a toss-up at certain points for me between wanting to just, like, stop reading and just, like, throw the book away, or, like, I have to keep reading to let this resolve because it's just, like, really so frustrating to have this sort of unjust accusation on Karen's part.
And I was wondering if they were going to, try and sort of give some nuance to Karen at some point, like, oh, she's having this real tough time because of some reason. But I mean, it's just she's just being so mean to Emily, and so she institutes these curfews that seem like almost specifically designed to prevent her from practicing with the droids.
Right. She says that Karen has to be home by 10, but the rehearsals go later.
Right.
Sorry, I said Karen. Emily has to be home by 10. And I think the closest thing the book does to giving nuance to Karen is that Emily is told multiple times and takes to heart the fact that it is really challenging and stressful to have a newborn baby.
Right.
And all these adjustments that Karen's going through are really challenging. But Emily makes the excellent point as the book wanes on that, like, hey, all that stuff's happening to me too. Like, I have a new family dynamic. There's a new baby in my house. That's my sister. Like, this is also hard on me. Nobody gives a shit how I feel. She doesn't use this language, but that's
essentially what's with the response.
The spirit of the reaction. So, plot-wise, one of the way that Emily and Elizabeth intersect is
Emily walks into the office of the Oracle, asking to help on the paper because Karen has told her to do that as a new hobby because it's more of a proper thing to do or something like that.
Yeah, writing is so much more intellectual than music.
Of course.
And Emily is just like, if Karen wants me to do it, I guess I should do it because otherwise she's going to send me away.
Right.
And Elizabeth is very like, Emily Meyer, like, isn't she a drummer? Like, she's not a writer. Why does she want to write? But she's willing to go along with it. But I just thought it was kind of funny that she...
it was a convenient way for her to be forced into contact with Elizabeth.
Mr. Collins asks Elizabeth to help Emily, like, prepare her, like, audition piece, like, something that she's going to write for the Oracle to be on the editorial staff. And so then they start to talk.
Yes. And so... But pretty soon... the whole reason she's doing this becomes apparent. I think she opens up to Elizabeth pretty quickly about all of this.
Well, one of the things that she tells Elizabeth fairly quickly is the secret about her mother.
Right.
Which I was like, whoa, okay, I guess you really trust her. I mean, she's trustworthy, don't get me wrong, but dang.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the passage where it's just like, oh, she's just so perfect and so approachable. And you can tell her anything, I guess. They definitely make her out to be Miss Perfect, kind of.
There is a part in chapter 6 where Emily says, let's see where we should start. It felt strange to Emily to have confided in Elizabeth Wakefield. Up until a week ago, Elizabeth had been no more than a casual acquaintance, the sort of girl Emily wished she knew better, but never felt entirely comfortable with. She had always thought of Elizabeth as a girl who had everything: good looks, a great sense of humor, outstanding grades, and a wonderful family. For those reasons, Emily could never have imagined dumping her own problems on Elizabeth. It was as if all the qualities that made Elizabeth so admirable also made her seem unapproachable. So, yeah. What can I say? Elizabeth problems, I can relate.
Right. And I think it would make more sense for her to approach her bandmates probably for some emotional support, but they literally kind of explain that away and they say, well, the droids are also laid back and then they even have her remembering when she spoke to Dana, and she could tell that Dana was probably not super keen on, getting too serious. They sort of say like, oh, well, the droids are all laid back people. They want no drama, basically. Yeah.
Also, Emily is really worried about the secret about her mother being getting out, and it's specifically to her bandmates, and even more specifically to Dan Scott, because she's like, if a few things, like if they knew that I was lying to them, that would look bad. And it would, because that is a weird big lie. But I guess you start with something like that when you're a kid, and you kind of just,
she's not in her life in any way, so she's gone. Yeah,
Emily even says, like, she's essentially dead to me, so...
Ouch.
And she says it in, like, her inner monologue, but, yeah, ouch indeed. And then she's also like, they wouldn't want to be friends with me if they knew what a shitty home life I have, which is so sad.
Yeah, it's such an awful thing to think, and of course... once the secret's out, they don't care in any way, but... Yeah,
well, speaking of that secret getting out, so, Dan calls the house, like, they arrange a time, and it's like, as soon as they arrange a date to like, meet up...
They specifically pick a time when Karen is taking Carrie to the doctor, so she won't be in the house. they won't bother anyone, and Emily can show Dan her new symbols.
Yeah. So Dan comes over, and Karen flips out. Can I read this scene? Because this is actually kind of a climax of the book.
Oh, yes.
Not the climax, but a climax.
It's the major turning point, and she arrives home earlier than Emily was expecting, and of course they're busy playing drums in the basement to hear her enter. And when she does, she, unsurprisingly, blows up at them.
I'm going to read a kind of a long passage here, okay? So we'll have the scene. She was so engrossed in the music that she didn't hear the garage door open upstairs, or the door slam as Karen came in. She didn't even hear little Carrie crying. The next thing she knew, Karen was downstairs, the sobbing baby in her arms. Karen's pretty face was contorted with rage as she stared first at Emily and then at Dan. I thought I made myself clear yesterday, Emily, she seethed, trying her best to quiet Carrie. Did I or didn't I tell you that there is to be no more noise in this house? Emily felt the color draining from her face. Not in front of Dan, she thought desperately. Please, Karen, don't humiliate me this way. But Karen was just getting started. I'm afraid you haven't introduced me to your friend, she said acidly, turning to look at Dan. The way she said friend sounded so awful that Emily cringed. I'm Dan Scott, Dan managed. I think maybe I better be going now. Yes, Karen said furiously. I think maybe you'd better. Emily, she added, her face burning, since when do you invite boys over without asking my permission? Since when do you invite boys into the house when no one else is home? Emily felt sick. You may not care how it looks to other people, Karen went on, but once again, young lady, you don't just have yourself to think of anymore. Emily felt angry tears stinging her eyes. We weren't doing anything wrong, Karen, she protested. You can see for yourself. I was just showing Dan my new symbols. I wasn't... Don't tell me what you were or weren't doing, Karen fumed. I've warned your father 1,000,000 times, she added. Why do you think I set curfews for you? Don't you understand it's just to keep this sort of thing from happening? Believe me, she added, her voice rising. I know what kind of home you were raised in, Emily. I know your own mother didn't care about things like curfews before she walked out on your father. But I, her voice dropped, am not going to permit you to turn out like your mother. Among other things, I simply will not have my baby grow up in a house with a tramp. At the mention of her mother, Emily had frozen. She barely heard the words that followed. All she knew was that her secret had been given away. Dan knew now that she was a liar, that her mother was still alive, and worse, he knew what people thought of her mother. Tramp. That was the word Karen had used, and that was the word Emily had heard from time to time when she was a little girl. And Dan also knew how little her stepmother thought of her, how horribly she treated her. Well, it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. Dan knew everything there was to know, and all Emily wanted was for him to leave the house as soon as possible. She never wanted to see him again, now that he knew what she really was, what her mother was. I think I'd better leave, Dan repeated. Karen had burst into tears, and little Carrie was crying too. Emily was too numb to cry. She barely looked at Dan as he left. She didn't ever want to look at him in the eyes again, she realized. She didn't think she could bear it. Not after what he'd just heard. Ooh, drama.
It's pretty brutal.
Upsetting. I mean, I was like aghast when she said the thing about the mother.
Oh yeah, it's so over the top. It's just
beyond
awful.
The veil.
It's crazy. So, it just seems like so much to throw out, like just to blow up on her at that level.
Well, and then
in front of someone else that supposedly she's thinking of, her family's reputation, but then
so many things that play here too. We have there's also another scene again where Emily practices her drums at a time when it has been established that Carrie is awake during these hours, so she's allowed to practice during these hours.
But that doesn't matter.
Because Karen comes down and she's raging like, I just got her to go to sleep. Like, how dare you? And Emily points out, like, but we have rules. This is another thing. It's like Karen is making up this rule about having boys in the house. There's no rule.
Right. That has never come up.
Yeah, Emily's not breaking a rule. Karen is changing the rules and making them up as she goes along.
Right.
And then Emily's getting in really bad trouble for it and getting totally insulted in a really cruel way.
Yeah.
But I think that even more maddening than this is when Emily brings this to her father, and there's a lot. Emily thinks all the time in the book. there's no point in complaining about Karen to my dad. He's not listening.
And I mean, yeah, they essentially, she says that, she eventually does bring, her complaints to him, and he always just seems to say, oh, well, your mother's having a difficult time. You should really just follow the rules and stop troubling her.
Yeah, it's hard for her. It's, and when he says, when she finally is like, but did she tell you what she said about my mother? He, like, explodes. He, like, slams his glass on the table. Yep. He's like, I don't want to hear another word. He's not even trying to listen. He's so angry that he's not even, like, countenancing that there might be two sides to the story.
Yeah, this is tough. Yeah, he's not a sympathetic ear. Karen is just, beyond the pale in terms of wicked stepmother.
Yeah.
And so the only person she has left to turn to is Elizabeth Wakefield.
Yeah, and I guess, like, the Wakefield family in general. So after this whole blow up, Emily calls Elizabeth and ends up going over to the Wakefield house. This is a point where, like, the family is all around the dinner table, right? It's this time. Mm-hmm. And Grandpa Wakefield, just upon hearing that Elizabeth's friend needs to come over, well, first of all, Elizabeth is like, Emily Meyer's going to come over. Yeah. And Ned Wakefield is like, who's that? Which I like that detail, because it reminds us, like, yeah, Emily and Elizabeth don't know each other before this. And reader, you didn't know anything about Emily before this book either.
Yeah, she's just visiting for dinner, just randomly. But of course, and she gushes to the entire Wakefield family what's just happened, basically.
Yeah, Emily does, but before Emily does, when Elizabeth just says that that her friend is coming over, the grandma says, "It's terrible what's happened to the American family."
Ha! There's another line for the grandparents there. You're like, whoa.
Yeah. That's Grandma's, like, instant assessment. Like, oh, problems at home? That didn't happen in my day.
Right.
The American family is falling apart at the seams. Back in my day, we all just suppressed our problems and didn't confide in our little friends. Mm-hmm. That's not what she says. But, I mean, it's not like people didn't have family problems before 1984.
Right.
So... but Emily does come over, and that's when, like, she does, like you said, she tells everybody, and she wants to stay there, but Ned is like, there's one condition. You can stay here tonight. Like, she's hoping, like, she's going to move in with the Wakefields or something. I don't know.
In the back of her head. She just needs to get away from everything.
Yeah, but Ned says she has to call home and tell her father where
she is.
Yeah.
Which seems reasonable enough, I guess, in that she's just gone off without telling anybody.
Yeah.
So...
as soon as she calls home, basically her dad guilts her into coming home right away.
He threatens to sell her drums.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which seems a little nasty.
To put them out in the rain.
Right, yeah. It seems it's a little drastic to go from...
Yeah.
He blows up at her, and she leaves the house to stay at her friends. And then when she calls to say, I'm just going to stay over, she's like, well, I'm going to put your drums in the rain.
Yeah, she says, Daddy, I'm not coming home, and he's like... to hell you're not, you know, I'm putting your drums outside. But weirdly, then, like, the next beat for Emily is that she, like, has a long talk that we don't get to see.
Of course.
And she decides that she is going to sell her drums.
Right. So she's accepted that she has the wicked stepmother.
She's lost.
But she doesn't want, and she's lost Dan, but she doesn't want to be sent away from Sweet Valley. So the boarding school threat is enough that she's going to play along and just try and deal with the bad family, like, situation at home. So she's going to sell her drums, work on the newspaper, and just sort of keep her head down. For now.
Yeah, and there's a moment, like, the next time she's seeing Dan, she's decided to sell her drums, and she's going to quit the Droids, and he comes up to her very sympathetic. He's like, empathetic even. He's like, I really want to talk about what happened. Like, that was awful. And this, I don't know if you could hear my voice as a listener to the show at this point in the book, just, like, yelling at Emily, like, just tell him what's wrong. Like, it's like she is spending all of her energy putting up this facade that everything's cool and there's no big deal. Mm-hmm. When, like, they're on the same page. If she just told him how she felt, they could have each other's support. But instead, he thinks that she doesn't, like, he's worried. I mean, he notices that she's acting weird, but on the surface, he's like, okay, I guess she doesn't really care that much. And then she's already sure that he hates her now, or he knows she's a liar, so he could never care about her.
Yeah. So Dan's on the sidelines wondering, wonder what's wrong with Emily. But yeah, she doesn't confide in him, which sucks. So. And
Emily puts an ad in the Oracle about selling her drums for $200.
Which, is even back then would be like, is not very much money for a nice, what is probably a brand new drum set.
And they make it clear that, like, the drums are worth way more than that.
Right.
Although, I did kind of think, like, well, sure, but it's like the high school newspaper. Like, how many kids the high school just have even $200 kicking around?
This high school has got a lot of high rollers with their Porsches.
What if Bruce Patman had bought the drums?
That'd be terrible.
Just for my music room. Like, how hard can it be to play the drums? That's the old Bruce, though.
Right.
Anyway, so Elizabeth and Dan hatch a little plan. It's really Dan's plan.
Yeah, but they're going to buy the drums and sort of hold on to them. Yeah, because they know once Elizabeth hears about this ad, she reaches out to Dan, and they both agree that she's being weird. And she's, it's like she's going to regret this. She doesn't actually not want to be a drummer. So that they essentially, the scheme is to basically just buy the drums and hold on to them until things blow over.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I think even Ron, her father, finds out she's selling them, and then he has like a little chat. It was like, "Oh, you're going to regret this if you sell them," which seems completely, he just threatened to put them out in the rain.
Yeah,
and she's made it clear that she won't be able to practice with the band if she has these curfews. So,
but this is where it's so weird that we weren't shown the conversation. But it's because now we're just like having to go on the subtext of this follow-up conversation.
Right.
I kind of assumed that Emily had been forced to quit the Droids, and she'd been forced to sell her drums after this difficult conversation with her mom and her father and stepmother. But then when we hear the aftermath and the dad's all shocked that she's selling her drums, the dad says something to her also like, did you talk with the band about making an arrangement so that you can still honor your curfew and have rehearsals? And she didn't talk to them about it.
No.
So it sounds like they're not even really trying to put the ultimatum on Emily that she has to quit.
Right.
They're just making up this curfew, and Emily is kind of like, well, fuck it then,
Yeah, it's hard to know what the scheduling conflict is and that. So yes, it seems like a very reverse sort of. Yeah, it doesn't seem to really match up with all the other conversations with her father and this whatever this big conversation was. I guess following her coming home from the Wakefields.
The one thing we can grant is that here's a glimpse that Emily is a little bit in her feelings and overreacting based on that, not just being forced into everything.
Right.
But also that the rules are constantly changing on her. So it's like even when she has bent over backwards and gone way too far to just in pursuit of pleasing them, even then the dad is like, that was a mistake. You shouldn't have done that.
Right.
It's like, give me a fucking break, Dad. I wish she'd blown up at them a little bit, but she doesn't. She's icily cool. She's numb.
Yeah.
The book talks about her being numb several times.
Exactly.
She should get that checked out.
And so she commits to just, she's going to babysit whenever Karen asks, which seems to be all the time.
Yeah, and there's that weird moment where Karen is like, can you cook dinner too? And really, again, back to the wicked stepmother thing.
Over the top.
She's a total Cinderella. Can you cook dinner too? And when Emily stands up for herself and says, it's kind of hard to do both of those things, like watching Carrie and cooking dinner. And Karen is like, but you don't care at all, do you? You don't understand how hard it is.
Yeah, and then, so she's just super nasty, and then she points out, oh, well, also this doll that you gave Carrie has this weird bead that's loose, and Karen just, snatches it out of her hands. It's like, what are you talking about?
She's like, Karen brings this doll home, and she's like, don't worry, Carrie, we won't let Emily take your toy away.
Oh, my God.
Literally is what she says.
Yep.
And Emily's watching Carrie play with this doll, and she's like, this bead is already coming loose. I just told you that bead looked loose. But Karen's on her high horse talking about some bullshit.
Now she's on the phone with her mother.
Oh, right.
Which they don't, go into, but they clearly imply that her relationship with her mother sounds awful. Oh yeah, Emily says like, "Oh, I would hate to, spend some time with these two."
Yeah, that actually I thought was a really delicious little detail because, psychologically you could understand how someone with a really strained relationship with their own mother would then turn around and be kind of a shitty mother to her stepdaughter.
Hopefully not, but in this case, she is being very shitty.
Right? Yeah.
And of course, while she's distracted on the phone, Carrie decides to go for that bead.
Yeah.
And swallows
it.
Except it apparently is a really big bead that a baby cannot swallow, so she starts choking.
Yeah, and this is so good. Did you
the big
mark
dramatic moment?
This part? You want to read it?
Yeah, let's see. Carrie, her mother screamed, grabbing the baby and shaking her. Emily could hear Karen's mother's voice, alarmed and high-pitched, calling something from the receiver dangling from the coffee table. "She's choking," Emily hollered, jumping to her feet. It was apparent to Emily that Karen had no idea what to do, and unless someone did something right away, Carrie was going to choke to death right before their eyes. "Give her to me," Emily said, grabbing Karen by the shoulders and turning around. But by this point, Karen was hysterical. She was hanging on to her baby with all her strength. Unless Emily could get Carrie out of her arms, the baby was going to suffocate. Emily didn't even stop to think. She had read somewhere that the best thing to do when someone was hysterical was to slap him or her. And that was exactly what Emily did. She slapped her stepmother as hard as she could, right across her face. Then she took advantage of Karen's momentary shock to snatch Carrie out of her arms. And then she performs a baby Heimlich maneuver, which she says, I've done this, you can use this on small children. I don't know if a relatively newborn infant use the exact same technique on the sternum. Okay.
There's a special baby Heimlich, I guess she does. I don't know.
She's able to use her training and save baby Carrie.
She saved Carrie's life. Then Dad walks in the door, like the worst moment.
Dramatically.
Karen's screaming and crying. The baby is crying, just getting her air back in her lungs. And the dad is like, "What have you done this time?"
Yeah.
Like, "Get out of here."
Yep.
Like, go upstairs. I don't want to hear anything from you.
Because,
and then when she tries to protest.
Yeah, well, Karen doesn't say a thing about this. She's crying over the baby, so doesn't really actually tell him what happens. And Emily says, fine, and just, leaves, essentially.
Yeah, and the dad's like, "Get out of here. Get out of here." And it's just like, oh my, holy Christ. I love it, though, that she gets to slap Karen. Oh, it feels good. And you're like, oh, and she saves the day. And you're like, yeah, but of course she doesn't get any credit for actually saving the baby, at least, at this point, because the dad is just blown up at her. So right. So she runs off to the Wakefields
after a brief stop at the Box Tree Cafe, which... has that ever shown up in the book?
It has.
Okay, I was like...
We don't talk about it much, but the Box Tree Cafe is one of these places that is just there.
Didn't want to stop at the Dairy Burger?
Yeah, right?
For some comfort food?
Yeah, she stops at the Box Tree Cafe. She has... and she's hatched this plan. She's going to call her mom... or she's going to go to Chicago. She's got these $200 from selling the drums. She's going to go to Chicago and show up at her mom's door.
Right. So she's going to do a quick stop at the Wakefields.
Yeah. Or she calls the Wakefields and Elizabeth is going to go pick her up. But Alice is like, "Oh, well, on your way home, can you stop by the grocery store and get some milk?"
This will be very convenient for getting some details for the next book story.
When I read that line, I was like, oh, why is the book needing her to do that? I couldn't remember. Are they going to run into Emily's parents there and what's gonna happen? But no, it's just so that they can meet someone. We'll get to it in a second. We'll fill you all in a moment. But anyway, of course, Elizabeth brings Emily home to the Wakefields, and then there's an interesting moment between Emily and Grandma Wakefield.
Yes. So Emily sort of is hatching her plan, and at this point, the grandmother, Doris or something. I can't remember.
I like Doris, but I don't think that's right.
Grandma Wakefield.
I don't know. I don't think she gets a name.
Yeah, maybe. Grandma Wakefield reveals that, I guess, that she actually is a stepmother herself to
Louis Wakefield. Apparently, Ned Wakefield has an older brother, a half-brother, named Louis. Mm-hmm. And I guess Grandma Wakefield, when she first married, she says her husband's name. Oh my God.
Is it Bob?
Bob.
Grandpa
yeah,
Bob.
It's Bob. Oh, I had a Grandpa Bob. So when she first married Grandpa Bob, he had a son, Louis, and the grandma had a really hard time. Or like they got along well with Louis, but then Louis got older and Grandma gave birth to Ned, and there was a hard time. And it's like eventually we came to be a family again, and I came to think of them both as my sons again, or for the first time. But that wasn't really until Louis was in college,
right.
And it took years to get there.
Yes, so she was saying that I, too, was a wicked stepmother, or at least had wicked stepmother tendencies. Not really. She doesn't say that outright, but she says I wasn't exactly a good mother to Louis, at least initially.
Which makes her whole American Family comment a little bit like Popcorn the Kettle Black.
Exactly.
Grandma.
Yeah, she definitely... she doesn't know what's happened to the American Family. I have no idea.
So Elizabeth then is all up in arms about the fact that she's going to have to tell her parents that Emily is staying over, and her parents definitely won't let Emily stay unless they have informed Emily's parents where Emily is. But she's like, Emily's definitely not going to agree to call her parents, but we can't let her not stay here. So she takes this problem to Mom and Dad, and like, basically, they all agree that Elizabeth should be the one that calls the house, and like, but Jessica is really against this.
She calls her a rat.
She calls her a rat, and she never comes around. She's just like, can't think on Emily, like, which I can kind of agree with Jessica on this one. Like, I'm not sure how much it helps right now for this, but whatever. Apparently, it does help.
It's not good to do it behind her back. It seems weird that they can't at least convince her to inform her parents. She doesn't even have to be the one to call, but they just say, like, we're going to call Mr. Meyer and let him know, because Emily won't do it.
And I wish I could tell you, listeners, what it was that Elizabeth said on this fateful phone call, but alas, it is yet another important conversation that this book skips right over. And the next thing you know, Ron and Karen are...
The Meyer family shows up at the Wakefield's doorstep, and Karen has seen the light. She realizes she's been a terrible mother to Emily this whole time.
She was jealous. She confesses her jealousy.
Yes.
It's like the spell is broken.
Yes.
Now she's not an evil witch anymore.
Just flip that switch.
So she gives Emily credit for
saving
Carrie's life. She confesses her jealousy. She apologizes for being a bitch. We didn't even talk about the fact that at one point Ron says to Emily that Karen told me that you're very rude to her. And Emily's like, what now? Like, when? Did she tell you what she said to me?
Yeah.
And that was the whole, like, mother conversation.
Right.
But I didn't say the part about, apparently Karen's been telling Ron that Emily's been rude to her, which is really not the case. We've seen those conversations.
She's protested against all these unfair rules.
But yeah, I mean, like, Emily appreciates the apology, and Karen fully takes all the responsibility, and I guess everything's perfect forever.
All is forgiven. Everything works out.
Yeah.
It's a happy ending.
And then there's some kind of a party. Oh, because...
the going away party for the grandparents.
So Alice eventually, going back to the first thing we talked about, which is the bee story, but the book brought it up first too, so it's not just us. We'll blame the book.
Yes.
Alice confesses to Ned that she's been feeling left out, and she knows it's silly, but she can't help her feelings, blah, blah, blah. And Ned tells the twins, like, hey, your mom is really feeling like you guys don't need her anymore, and it's making her sad. And they know that they've like sensed that something's weird, but not giving a shit.
There's a great conversation where Elizabeth is sort of noticing her mother is doing all these things and taking off work. And it's like, does mother seem disappointed? And Jessica's like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're paranoid.
Yeah. Like, why would mom... And Jessica has a point. Like, why would mom suddenly be all weird about whether or not we're a happy family? Ned, incidentally, has a moment where he says of Alice, "You're the best mother in the whole world, Alice Wakefield, and the best wife. And don't you forget it." Which, I'm not sure that I
not
fully
the best.
agree. Also, even earlier, Ned, Mrs. Wakefield said seriously, leaning forward on her chair to look directly at him, "Do you think I've been neglecting the girls lately?" Neglecting them, Mr. Wakefield burst out laughing. Alice, are you kidding? You're a wonderful mother. Which, I mean, he's not really one to say.
Yeah.
They both have been guilty of some neglect here and there. Yeah. But whatever, they're a wonderful, beautiful family, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, the events of Runaways, a couple books in the past now. They forgot about that little episode.
And compared to Karen and Ron, they're like parents of the century, so...
Correct.
But yeah, anyway, the twins come up with a really brilliant plan. They're going to consult their mother about a going away party for the grandparents. And it's brilliant because it's something that they can ask their mom's advice and help about without making it obvious that they knew there was a problem.
Right.
Because it's still, like, about the grandparents.
Yes. So they're able to help set up the party with their mother. Alice feels better and doesn't feel as neglected. She gets to do something with her daughters for the first time in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And they throw the party, and of course they invite the Meyer family to join them. And then also, as special musical guests, the Droids play in their dining room.
Yeah. And when Emily walks in, there's her drum set, and everything's all happy and wonderful.
Yeah, so they have an awesome concert in the Wakefield household.
Yeah. And the only thing that's amiss at all is that it involves going to the part of the podcast where we talk about boys.
Ooh.
Oh, 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 who's a beautiful boys, a beautiful boys. I'm in danger of losing my head.
There aren't too many boys in this book that we haven't already talked about. There's a man whose name is Cliff Green, who is apparently Emily's drum teacher, but we don't find anything else about him other than that his name is Cliff Green. I love it, though, when characters get a full first and last name and then nothing else, and they're never going to be important again. But there is a boy that appears, a late-breaking appearance in the book, and his name is Eddie Strong.
Oh, such a good name.
Eddie Strong was a sophomore at Sweet Valley High, and Elizabeth had gotten to know him at the Oracle. He was interested in graphics, and he had done some layouts for Mr. Collins. I don't know who Eddie Strong is.
Okay, no details. Yeah, but he does provide some hints for the next story. But yeah, we don't really get too much of Eddie, just that he has a cool name. And we at least hear that...
well, he delivers groceries.
Right, he delivers groceries. So that's why...
So Elizabeth runs into him at the grocery store, and that's the whole reason that the book has her go to the grocery store.
Right. She has to pick up milk while also picking up Emily or whatever.
So, listeners, if you think way back to a book about Regina Morrow, you'll remember that Regina Morrow is in Switzerland getting her ears. Her eyes.
Her eyes are good. Her ears are getting better.
Getting her ears
She's getting
healed.
Special treatment in Switzerland for her hearing.
Why did I say that? Anyway, yeah, but Eddie's like, when did Regina get back in town? And Elizabeth's like, what? And then she talks to Bruce Patman about it. Bruce is like, like, I would know. If Regina's in the middle of her treatment, she's not back. And then there's this really terrific moment where Bruce picks up a cordless phone.
Oh, yeah. While he's outside, just after swimming in the Olympic-sized pool.
A minute later, he was back, a cordless phone in hand. My father's latest toy, Bruce explained and smiled, showing her the phone. Designed for people too lazy to budge. You can keep the phone next to you wherever you go. Don't let my sister find out about that, Elizabeth said. That's all we need. Oh, God.
Uh-oh.
And she has no idea what's coming for her. And I don't know what's coming for Regina either. Is she there? Somebody answered the phone who says it's her aunt. That's weird.
But Regina doesn't have an aunt?
Yeah, her parents are both only children.
Yeah, so it's something fishy is going on.
Yeah.
So she's gonna have to. Yeah, Elizabeth is gonna have to investigate that. But it is really interesting how they say, oh yes, Bruce Patman has been dating Regina, and he's been reformed for the better. I have some question marks there saying, I'm not sure about... We'll see about that.
We'll see. Can a person really change? Can a Bruce Patman really change?
We will have to see.
There's one more thing. That is related to the boys, so that's good. There's one more thing I'd like to say about boys, and I just want to... can I describe Dan to you?
Yes.
Because we did get a nice description of Dan Scott. Dan was almost 17, with sun-streaked, baby-fine brown hair and gray eyes that crinkled up at the corners when he smiled. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but Emily had always liked his looks. He had a wonderful smile, too, she thought. Very shy and sweet. So, there's Dan.
I thought you thought of me when you said that.
You do have some of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have gray eyes?
I don't have those.
Your eyes crinkle up at the corners when you smile.
That's true.
As do most human beings.
Yes.
But, you know what? You are very shy and sweet.
That's, yeah.
A beautiful boys, a beautiful boys, a beautiful boys.
So, are you ready to divulge to me, Dan Gaspari? Are you a Jessica or an Elizabeth?
Well, I'm also a Dan, but I would have to say I'm an Elizabeth. Jessica doesn't do anything bad this book, but we all know that she's up to no good.
She's pretty good in this book. She's not that much of a factor, but she's pretty good.
Yeah. No, but overall, yeah. I would say I'm more of Elizabeth. I'm happy to help a friend in need, as Elizabeth does. Not even really a friend, more of a mild acquaintance.
Yeah. Was there another character in the book that you related to? You had that
just
Dan
Dan, basically.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good character to relate to.
No, I really thought you picked the book for me just because of the Dan Scott character.
Let's say subconsciously, I probably did.
There you go.
And I knew that your middle name was Scott.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe next time there's a book about a character named Dan.
Right.
I'm sure there'll be another Dan out there sometime.
Probably.
Or maybe this Dan will come back.
We'll see.
And if this Dan comes back, I think this Dan should come back.
Oh, I'll hold you to that.
Okay. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Listeners, thank you so much for writing reviews on Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, of the show. There are a few new ones, and oh my gosh, it just makes me so happy to read them. If you could just give a 5-star rating there, that's really helpful to the show. Tell your friends. I love to hear about people having told someone that they knew about the show and they got really excited. You never know who secretly is really interested in Sweet Valley exploits. Recently I found out that the student of one of my former guests listened to his episode and was didn't know anything about Sweet Valley before, but was like, I can't believe these books exist. And that's like my dream come true. If current 19-year-olds can hear about these books and be like, whoa, that was a thing, and enjoy the conversation, then I feel like I've succeeded here.
Very nice.
You can find me on Twitter at Sweet Valley, or better yet, on Instagram at Sweet Valley Diaries. And, send me an email, sweetvalleydiaries@me.com. The website is sweetvalleydiaries.net. And it mostly has links to the podcast, but you can also read the reviews that I wrote of these books when I read them in the early 2000s. You'll find that my opinions have not changed that much, but I don't really remember what I said back then, so who knows. Dan, thank you so much. Would you care to tease us for book number 26?
I'd love to. What has happened to Regina Morrow, and who is her mysterious aunt? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 26. Hostage!
Ha ha! Exclamation point!
Exclamation point!
So does that mean meet Miss America?
Who's Emily Meyer? She's in our class at school, Jessica said. And I think she's having some problems at home, she added in a stage whisper. I guess I should whisper that. And I think she's having some problems at home, she added in a stage whisper. Oh dear, Grandma Wakefield said, looking distraught. That sort of thing upsets me so much. I just don't know what's happening to the American family these days. Parents don't have enough time for their children anymore, that's what it is, Grandpa Wakefield said. Alice, this steak is delicious, he added appreciatively. Did you add something special to it, or is it just the ear out here that makes it so good?